No, this is not We're Live, Pal, but it kind of is like a sequel. Like We're Live, Pal, the next morning. Andrew Zarian is here to debut my new show on our Fight Game Media Network using the same Fight Game podcast branding there. We got to get some use out of this thing. And Andrew, what's up, man? Thanks for jumping on.
Nice and early for you today.
Nice and early for me. I have my green tea because I'm trying to I'm doing some stuff with my diet where I'm trying to keep my fast going as long as humanly possible. So even putting a little bit of tiny cream in my coffee could be throwing my fast off. So I'm starting the morning with green tea, which is a crazy thing to me right now.
So last night I threw mine, whatever diet I'm on, totally out the window when I ordered Korean fried chicken at like 9:30 at night.
Wow. That is a great order. Obviously, it was like through DoorDash or whatever you use.
Yeah, so, Uber Eats always.
Uber Eats, yeah. So last night on AEW Dynamite, we had talked about this on We're Live, Pal, what this important announcement was for Tony Khan. And it turns out they are running a giant stadium, Wembley Stadium, for their big show in late August. And they are calling it AEW All In. And now, as we know, because we've been to these shows before, All Out is in September, and we're unsure right now whether All Out is going to be on the same date. Though I know Will Washington last night said it's going to be in Chicago. It's still going to happen. We don't have a date necessarily, so I don't know if it's going to be the next week, as it is historically that Labor Day weekend, or not. But what did you think of Tony's announcement, even though, you had kind of called it on We're Live, Pal, yesterday?
Yeah. I knew it was England, obviously. I think a lot of people knew it was London based on his interviews over the weekend. But we had spoken about this, how, what is it, OVO Arena in Wembley?
Right.
Wembley Arena, or whatever it's called. I was initially told Wembley, and I was like, Wembley Stadium? Like, when? And then I tried to piece it together, and my assumption was, well, it's going to be probably Wembley Arena because they're not going to try to run the stadium. That's a gigantic stadium.
Yes.
So it was a little too risky of a guess to assume the stadium, but you know what? He's running the stadium the week before the scheduled All Out pay-per-view. As far as I know, the show is still happening. We had heard that he was trying to get the United Center, right? That was like the first piece to this. Maybe they could run it later, but the other part that you got to remember, they have a big stadium show also in September, and that's Grand Slam.
Yes.
And as far as I know, that's happening this year at the end of September, whatever that week is. So look at it this way, right? They got a pay-per-view coming up in May, right? They got the May pay-per-view. They got the June pay-per-view. Two big, back to back, right? This Double or Nothing is going to be a big show. Obviously, it's in Vegas, Memorial Day weekend. Then you have Forbidden Door, which is a mega show in Toronto. Then you're coming back 2 months later. You're going to England for possibly a 40 to 60,000. They're hoping, right? In attendance stadium show. You come back to the States the week after. You run All Out in Chicago. And then 2 weeks later, you're running a stadium again. That's a lot of big shows.
Yes, absolutely. And it can be a great thing because if you remember when AEW was running hot, we always bring up this All Out pay-per-view from 2001. And it felt like it was like big show, big dynamite. And he was kind of on a roll there. And I wonder if he's creating that again, which would be fantastic. By the way, great human Joel Pearl says this should be called We're Live Again, Pal.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to bring Joel back on We're Live, Pal. So the piece of this that I think is very interesting is they can sell, I think, 15 to 20,000 tickets, like boom, immediately, right? Next day. People are going to be hot for this. We've waited a long time for
you. You know what? I'm going to say more. just because first time market, right? We obviously know the 20,000 first time market easy, but I'll say more because the expectation is Tony's running a gigantic stadium at the end of the summer. What does he have? There has to be something gigantic, right?
I mean, I think we kind of hinted about it yesterday, right? Which is if does he do these shows in the way that he's doing them without thinking that he can bring CM Punk back to TV?
I mean, you listen. We spoke about this, right? Tony's a really smart guy. I don't think he would be booking a mega stadium show without thinking he has CM Punk back.
Now,
Plan.
Well, I don't know the timeline of this, and I'm not even throwing this out because I don't know any information about it. But over WrestleMania weekend, there was this discussion about whether or not Drew McIntyre is going to re-sign with WWE. I would think you got to re-up that dude. That dude is great. He's perfect for WWE. You've mentioned the lost big run from the pandemic. They could always do that over again for him because he's such a great performer. But that if that guy was out on the free agent market, then you'd bring him in for a big show like that. But I don't know what his contract details are like.
Yeah, I don't know either. Would WWE want Drew to go? No, but maybe Drew, he's seen, my run's been kind of weak the last, I don't know, couple months. I'm kind of out of that main event picture. I could go away for 2 years and then come back, but Drew's making a ton of money there, and he's very well liked. So I don't know why he would want to go, but you never know with people. I listen, man. If I'm gonna guess now, I'm gonna say Punk is 100% happening soon, right? Like that's my guess.
Yep.
Unless Tony has something really big planned, but other than let's say the number is 45,000, right? Let's say, okay, fine, that's great. They could do that easy. Everybody has criticized AEW for running small first-time markets. New York's really the big one that he did with taking a risk of a 20,000 person stadium, and he did. He did 20,177 in that building. The following year, he did 13.5. So he's taken that risk, but first time for a stadium too. That was the big allure too in the New York market. But you're going to England. They're gonna be hot for this. London's gonna be super hot. But you still need something really big. Is let's say, would an Osprey main event, Osprey Omega main event be something that could draw 45,000 to 60,000 people? Or is it Punk Omega? Punk Omega, in my opinion.
They could put together a card that makes a whole lot of sense and but here's the thing, right? Now, we don't want them to use WWE's blueprint for everything. But what WWE does really well is make a big show feel like a big show. And I think the AEW marketing machine is going to have to really go into overdrive for this show because they'll sell those 20, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's even more than 20. Maybe it's 30 that they can just boom, sell first day. But then there's there's an extension of that number to fill that building up to where I think people would be like, okay, this is a success versus like, they only really put 25 in that giant building. I would like to see them, 45 sounds like a pretty good number. 50 sounds like a tremendous number. The marketing machine to make this thing feel like it's bigger than anything they've ever done, which is what WWE just did with WrestleMania. Yeah. That is what I want to see.
That was the biggest WrestleMania of all time. They've never done a WrestleMania this big in so many ways.
They don't have the numbers and the head count that WWE has, obviously. Like, this is not me expecting, a fourth of the amount of people to do the same amount of work. But there needs to be an effort in that way because that's exactly what this show is. It is a giant show for them, and you want it to be perceived in that manner for the wider pro wrestling landscape. And that's what WWE did so well with this WrestleMania. Like, I saw so many outlets talking about this show. And so what happens is all my friends who don't watch wrestling anymore, they realize that they have this thing called Peacock,
Yeah.
and the show is on, and they're hearing about it from social media. They're hearing about it from their friends, and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna tune in." One of my really good friends, I don't. I mean, I imagine he watched wrestling during the Hogan era at some point, but he hit me up on Sunday night, and he's like, "Hey, does my 199 subscription for Peacock work with WrestleMania?" I was like, "Yeah," and it's on. You may have to watch some commercials here and there, but he's like, "Okay, cool." And so he's watching the show, and I'm like, "Dude, you're like we do a baseball podcast together. We don't do wrestling stuff. Like, why are you watching?" And it was just because that's what everyone else was doing that night, was just tuning in to see what was going on with WrestleMania. So can AEW create that kind of interest and that kind of visibility for a giant show like this? Now, it's in the UK, so maybe they don't spend as much money in the US because you got to market in the UK. But I just love this idea of Tony Khan has this big show, and he's got this great opportunity to drive so much interest back into this product, which is what we saw in September of 21 when we thought, the greatest pay-per-view we've ever been to.
Yeah. No, it definitely, we talk about that all the time. I'm looking at the promotional poster right now, and it is impressive. They got Kenny, and Kenny's the main in this poster. There's other options. A lot of people are saying, well, it's going to be Punk Omega. It doesn't have to be. It could be Punk and FTR versus whoever, and you could lead to Kenny. Kenny could be Chicago. You could do that, and imagine that at United Center doing that. There was also the Bill Goldberg conversation.
I've been hearing a little bit more of that conversation of late.
Which is interesting. AEW doesn't have the spectacle match. It
Yeah.
doesn't. I mean, they have Sting, right? They have Sting. They have Jarrett. But really, you don't have that, like, the Brock Lesnar that comes in. You're like, oh, wow, okay, we got a Brock Lesnar. Or a Logan Paul or whatever. Those spectacles, like, you want to see this. Goldberg's Goldberg, but he's still Goldberg. Will he add people if you do something intriguing with Bill Goldberg in that building? Yeah, I think he would. I think people would be interested to see what could happen. Sting's possibly retiring soon. A nice send-off for Sting in a singles match. There's a lot of options here.
You have some hooks as well. So Double or Nothing is in Vegas. Double or Nothing.
There's one. There's one hook. There's only one hook.
There's only one hook. Yeah, you're right. You're right. But they have Double or Nothing, which is going to be a big show for them. But that's going to lead into Forbidden Door. And Forbidden Door is a little bit more for the hardcores, but it's still going to be a high-quality wrestling show. And then you'll have, a little while with these two big shows back-to-back, if it is going to be All In and All Out. And you could use All In. First time in the market, let's create some matchups that people have never seen before, but also we could actually create a matchup that leads into All Out. And if, like, I'm just using your example, if you wanted to build towards CM Punk versus Kenny Omega, you could, like you said, do this 6-man tag with the Elite and Kenny versus Punk and FTR on this All In show and build the angle. Shoot the angle, great match, and then the angle that creates the main event to your All Out show. So that is something that could happen. I just don't know about, back-to-back pay-per-views or pay-per-views in like less than a month kind of time frame, because that's just not what they do. That's not their business model right now. So I'm interested to see how they're going to sell the show to their fan base to watch. That I'm keeping my eye on that for sure.
All right, I'm gonna throw a couple names and options here. Right, let's play fantasy booker for a second.
Okay.
CM Punk comes back. You do a tag match somehow, right? You keep him no singles match. It's him and FTR versus somebody. There you go. There's one attraction. Mercedes Moné.
Yep.
Versus Paige. Mercedes has her match at Forbidden Door. You could introduce her like that, and then something happens, and you build this big title match with Paige. That's another attraction. You'll have a big Sting match. You could do something there with that. You bring in Bill Goldberg. You have something there with that. There's a lot of options here. Is it 45,000 is a very realistic number for them.
Yeah.
I think that's a very realistic number. But if you're doing this for the first time, you don't want it to be a realistic number. You kind of want to say, oh, wow.
Yes.
And that's 60.
Yes.
So what do you have to do to get you to 60? I don't know.
You know what they got? They got to pull from WWE's card, right? WWE likes to bring Tyson Fury onto these shows. He's a giant name in boxing. AEW should go on that line. You know, Anthony Joshua, who just won his comeback fight. He's been a bit of a disappointment in boxing, but he's still such a giant name, and he draws such a tremendous number of people. I would have him be something. He doesn't have to have a fight, but he can be a heavy for the baby faces. Joel has an idea. He says, give me Goldberg and Wardlow versus Powerhouse Hobbs and QT.
Oh, big meat match.
Let's
big
do it.
Meat match.
Yeah, because you would have QT kind of holding it together a little bit if it does get out of line. So you know, this is the stuff that we love talking about. You're a marketing guy, so your head just starts going crazy with ideas when it comes to this stuff. But yeah, you know, this could be that shot in the arm for AEW that they need to kind of get a little bit of their share back, I would say, because WWE's been so hot of late. But let's pivot a little bit to WWE and the coverage of Vince McMahon and the sale. And you and I had a joke yesterday on We're Live, Pal, about how, you know, the mustache. And I was like, yeah, like a lot of people are upset that mustache is creating the disguise per se for what the real issues are with Vince coming back. And I saw Lance Storm on F4W was just like, I can't believe it. Like, you know, this guy, there's a reason why he left. And, you know, he's got all these things, and it's really bad, you know, for him to have all of these things on his resume, and yet we're just bringing him right back to run this business. And Ari Emanuel's like, of course, I was never going to let Vince McMahon leave. Like, we need Vince. So what do you think about the coverage of Vince so far? I think the hardcore pro wrestling fans are we all knew this is what was going to happen. We've seen the playbook of this happening before. But what do you think about the mainstream media? Because the mainstream media, at least as far as I can tell, are just kind of eye rolling and going like, well, this is what pro wrestling is to us. Like, it's not serious.
Yeah. And that's literally what it is. Listen, this is a man that wore a neck brace during his trial, right? Whether or not he did get surgery or not is not the case.
I think he had surgery. It's just the idea of,
he did.
Did he schedule it for this?
Of course he did. Of course he scheduled it. Allegedly. I mean, of course he did. You know, it's such a daunting look where you're kind of it's becoming the attraction here, and it worked. You know, I don't think that's a very old school, you know, PR tactic. Do something ridiculous and take away from the real story, and I mean, he looks ridiculous. It's such an absurd look. You got to react the way you do. But, you know, I think the coverage has been very interesting. And like CNBC's been all over this more than I thought they would. But
the guy who actually was the one who had the story first, Alex Sherman from CNBC, he beat, as far as I could tell, he beat Bloomberg's Lucas Shaw by about 4 minutes. But yeah, like, I thought that was really amazing. Like, I follow Alex Sherman on Twitter. I know who Alex Sherman is, but he wasn't one of these like giant mainstream reporters that, you know, it's not Variety, it's not, you know, whatever. And I was so happy to see him be the person to break the story. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, so, you know, now that we're getting more information about the sale, right? We spoke about it on Tuesday on We're Live, Pal, about Liberty Media being a very big front runner in this, right? They were really at first when the initial story broke, it was going to be a private equity group, because the concept of pulling, you know, merging, right? You're not buying a publicly traded, you're merging with them. To merge with Comcast or with somebody else, and then for Vince to continue to stay in power, it didn't seem like that's a reality. The only reality there was the private equity group that would most likely leave things the way they are.
Right.
whether it's the Saudis or the Qataris or, any other private equity group, they're going to leave Vince alone. And that's essentially what's happening here, where, Vince has more power than he did, because now he's not only in charge of WWE, he's executive, he's the executive of the board, right? For this new company.
Whatever this new company that they have not named yet, but the ticker symbol TKO.
TKO. So I think Ari's smart where he knows that life after Vince is sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
So if Vince is there for 2 to 5 years more, I mean, by the time he's 77 now, he's going to be in his early to mid 80s. By the time, he exits, he would most likely be out by then. But Ari's going to pick up everything from Vince over the next couple of years.
Well, we've talked about this idea, and the television show, which I'm still only in the first in the first season of Succession. Succession is ending, but the idea, and this has always been the conversation around WWE, is Vince going to create his succession plan, and then it was sort of created for him when he had to step down. But now, that's the thing that I would wonder again. Like, it's funny because Bob Iger had come back to Disney, and immediately everyone's like, oh, we're going to go through this again. He's got to create the succession plan and the successor, and he's not going to like who it is. And, this whole idea that he's just too intertwined with this business to really, really step away. But Vince is much older, and I think like he does have to, whatever it is, if it's, Nick Khan is right underneath him in this new company. So, but Nick Khan is not going to understand the wrestling piece of things. Obviously, Triple H is right there as well. But I think some of what Vince is going to have to do is really teach a lot of people the business. And, I was joking and saying like, oh, this is perfect for Ari. He gets Vince for 2 years, and then he learns everything he can to then create that succession plan for whoever comes in. And then he's like, okay, we've had enough of you. You give us.
Well, listen, maybe Steph is a succession plan.
Does she get rehired? Is that a prediction? She gets rehired. She's an employee of the new company.
I would not be surprised that within the next 12 to 18 months, Stephanie McMahon comes in some capacity in that new company, because really, I mean, she was leaving to take a temporary leave, and then she was forced to come back, and then she's back on her temporary leave. Now, I haven't heard that she's planning on coming back, but I never was told that she was never going to come back. Like, she was done. Yeah. So I would imagine, you want the best people that could possibly run this company, that know what they're doing. There's not a lot of people that have been there over the last 30 to 40 years that understand the business, other than, Hunter's been there forever and he gets it. Stephanie, Shane's been out for too long, and I don't think he's planning on coming back to that grind,
because he just doesn't have a quadriceps muscle right now.
His quad is gone. But, like Bruce Pritchard, he's one of the only other people, really, if you think about it. Kevin Dunn, Bruce Pritchard, who else has been there for that long that knows Vince's inner workings and how that company works? It's not necessarily just the Vince McMahon, what you can learn from Vince. It's, 50 years or 40 years of doing business a certain way in a very closed environment. Like, this new WWE where PR is contacting us regularly and we could communicate with them and ask questions, and they provide us with, they confirm stuff. That's not how wrestling worked. That's a new concept, especially under Nick Khan. With the Nick Khan era has been wide open. So, there's not a lot of people that know that side of the business. And I think Steph would be the only real successor to Vince in any capacity. It's Steph and Hunter.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Or the other option is you bring in, someone from like a Showtime Boxing or from
Steven
Bellator.
Espinoza.
Steven Espinoza. There you go. Who are you going to bring in to run this?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Do you bring in Tony Khan? I mean, I'm making a joke, but I'm not really. Who do you bring in? Like who knows wrestling that could? Jeff Jarrett. I'm telling you, dude, it's going to be Jeff Jarrett. That's the guy that's going to be laughing at the end is going to be Jeff Jarrett.
I interviewed Jeff with Dave, and my sense was after that interview was done, Jeff doesn't like numbers.
Did he tell you that he's great?
No, I know that he's great.
He is great.
He's fantastic. But yeah, I don't think he's a numbers guy. So let's talk about this Liberty Media thing for a second, because Puck News, Dylan Byers, he talked to I think he talked to Mark Shapiro, and they mentioned that, it was nip and tuck the whole way with Liberty Media and Endeavor. I in this weird sort of cynical mindset that I have, I wonder if it came down to who was willing to keep Vince on and who wasn't. And if you weren't willing to keep Vince on, did your bid have to be like so much better than the other bid? Because if Endeavor was like, yeah, we have Dana, like, we're not afraid of bringing in people, like that. But would Liberty Media have brought in Vince, or would he have also been on this like retainer of like, okay, you're going to be here for 6 months and help us with this transition, and then you're gone? Like, I don't know any of that, but I was just wondering what you thought about, this idea that Vince had to be here in order for this company to be sold.
I'm 100% whoever bought it, Vince was going to be there. I think Liberty knew that that he was going to be there. Again, I'm piecing stuff together, but I'm under the impression that whoever was purchasing this, Vince would be there, and I don't think that's why. I was told there were more than one media conglomerate that was very interested. So, I mean, there's only a couple people that would have the money. Comcast, Fox, I don't think Paramount, but it was probably down to them. And or like a Disney, right? The likelihood that Vince would stay in power if a Disney purchased them, that would be out the window. It really came down to the offer. The private equity groups, that would have been a cash offer, but it would have been much less, $3 billion less than what they're getting now. So, the market valuation is $6.36 to $7 billion. Vince has a lot of room here now with this, and there's no cash being exchanged. It's mostly stocks, and I'm sure there's a time frame on when you understand how some of that stuff goes, but I'm sure there's a time frame on when they can sell the stock. But, Vince is going to essentially put $3 billion in his pocket from the sale. I don't think that was going to be a possibility with a $6 billion sale.
Yeah. No,
so, and to be honest,
a piece of it. Yeah, for sure.
I didn't know that Ari and Vince have been friends for 20 some odd years. So that's an interesting element here, that they've been friends for so long. And we know the relationship Dana has had with Vince over the years. It kind of makes sense if you're thinking about, like, where is he going to stay in power the most? It would most likely be, UFC.
Can we reboot Entourage?
Oh my God, yeah. I think we should. It's happening.
Can we get all of those characters back together, and then they create this super company, and then we'll need a Dana White character, we'll need a Vince character. And yeah, let's bring Entourage back. I'm in for like 2 or 3 seasons of an Entourage reboot covering this Endeavor piece.
Those guys are from my neighborhood, right?
Are they?
Yeah, they're from this side of Queens. They're from Bayside, Flushing. Yeah.
Are you telling me that a turtle or two?
Turtle's definitely based on real people that I know. 100%. I know many turtles.
So this stuff's fascinating. You and I will be talking about it seemingly forever on We're Live, Pal. Yeah. I kind of wanted to steer the conversation for these last 10, 15 minutes here. Every time you talk about sort of what, where Live, Pal, Wrestling Observer Live, the show that I do with Dave, Wrestling Observer Radio, my own Fight Game podcast on F4W, you've mentioned to me, this is where it's at. F4W, Wrestling Observer. It's the New York Times, I think, is what you've used as
New York Yankees, the New York Yankees,
of this space.
And I'm a Mets fan. Just saying.
Where do you see yourself? Like I'm a little bit older than you, so I'm closer to retiring, though that's not going to happen anytime soon. You're still kind of thriving in your career. Like, can you still balance all the wrestling stuff that you do and keep thriving in your career? Or do you think that, at some point, maybe this stuff has to stop? Like, how do you view the time? Because it's just a time suck for you to be doing this stuff. And you and I do it more for passion than anything else. Like, if we wouldn't do it if we didn't love it.
Yeah.
And like, how do you balance that with your life?
I talk about that with my wife regularly. Like every couple of days we're talking about this, but my career gives me access to the things I have in pro wrestling.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people don't, I don't know if they know that or they could piece it together. Like, my background is in marketing and consulting, and the people that I've met over the last, 15 years of doing this has given me access to these amazing things in pro wrestling where I could, I get told things and I could talk about it, and it's led me to, host the Wrestling Observer live show on Sundays and to be on here. We do some breaking news stuff. We do some really cool stuff. I do it because I genuinely love doing it. I don't do the wrestling stuff to make money off of it.
Yeah.
Like, if I never made a penny, like, it's cool. Like, sometimes we make money. We sell some big ads, we make some money. But if I never made a dime from this, I'm still doing it at the same level I'm doing it today. For me, it's a passion project, and I also have an anxiety about being tied to money with this, because then there's an expectation, right?
Sure.
Like, there's an expectation that Andrew has to, for example, let's say I go to Fightful or I stay with Observer, and I'm like, okay, listen, guys, I'm leaving my day job. I want to do this exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
The hits are going to come from news stories that I break, right? Like, obviously there are a lot of people that like listening to us and watch us, but at the end of the day, what's bringing a lot of viewers is the possibility that I could talk about something.
Mm-hmm.
I like the ability of doing that. I don't like the expectation of having to do it.
Sure.
So, because then you go down a slippery slope. I don't work as hard as Dave. I don't work as hard as at all. I say this all the time. And I know the inner workings of what Dave does.
Oh yeah.
Daily. It's insane the amount of work that he has to do. Sean Ross Sapp, right?
Yep.
I'm using hand quotes. Competitor, right? Whatever. I'm cool with everybody because I'm not tied to money. But Sean, I could never do what Sean does. Sean is on the phone, digging, confirming. He works extreme. And there's a number of other people. I don't want to, I'm not going to skip over anybody. I'm just giving two examples here. I would never want that expectation because I don't have at this point in my life, I don't have the time to be able to chase down stuff. I think the fun part of what we do is that I get told things over dinner, and then I call you, and I'm like, dude, you won't believe what was that, and then we talk about it. I talk about it with you, I talk about it with Rich, I talk about it on Observer Live, I'll text Dave. I find this to be therapeutic for me because it's an escape from my reality of real hustle and bustle. And Garrett, some of the inner workings of my day job.
Yeah.
It's insane what I deal with 8 or 9 of my clients that I don't even name. Like, I don't feel comfortable naming all my clients. I talk about the ones that are fun, that there's something to talk about, but like, I'm a tornado daily. And sometimes I'm on a great run and I could have like 6 months of really awesome wrestling stuff, and then I go away for 3 months.
The way that you just said that makes a whole lot of sense to me, in that everything that you sort of do with this stuff, it's kind of a bonus for you because the expectation isn't there for you to create it daily. So when you have something, you're excited to share it, you get some run off of it for a few weeks, and then when you have something again, you share it again. And so you're almost always keeping up in a way that, you're having a good time with it. You get a little bit of traction, and it just seems like, oh yeah, Andrew Zarian has something to say here. We need to keep our ears open. But if you were doing this for a living, the expectation would be there.
Astronomical.
And if you didn't have a hit, every week, then people go, oh, Andrew, he's not as good as we thought he was, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, or, and I've seen this happen to some really good journalists in wrestling media, right? I've seen this happen where, man, they're on a roll for like an entire summer. They're on a roll for an entire season with some really great stuff. Their business is based on this. They're making money from this. Then, you know what? Occasionally things happen. People get laid off. People change jobs. People don't feel comfortable telling you things anymore. And all of a sudden, your livelihood is at risk. Right? And then what happens? You start maybe stretching the truth a little bit, and you start being a little bit vague. And I've seen this happen. I'm not naming names, and the people, even the people that have done that, I know personally, and I would say they're good people. It just becomes very difficult unless if you are like that top 1% tier of media coverage. You gotta be connected. And it's very difficult if you're not really involved in sports media. Dave is a sports guy, right? And that helps him beyond wrestling. It helps him because he has a good understanding of sports journalism and how to talk to people and how to communicate with people. Same thing with Sean. Sean knows sports. I'm not as comfortable with being a journalist because I'm not a journalist. I'm not a writer. I'm just a guy that does this. And you know what? It's worked out well for me. I
think it's been great. If this is your passion and you have fun with it.
I have no ego with this stuff. You know what I mean? Like people could criticize me for my day stuff. Like I'm a nightmare with work. Like I'm super hyper aggressive with my day job because my money's on the line.
Right.
But with this, like I have no ego. Like I tell Rich all the time, if something happened and I don't like wrestling tomorrow, like I could go away.
Yeah. No,
and I'm done.
It's a great spot to be in. Okay, so you just said the ego piece. There is something that comes along with as you get a little bit more famous is the wrong word, but as you get a little bit more visibility, the social media aspect of this can be frustrating, right? Because you have so many people of bad faith who are tweeting at you, who are trying to make something that you didn't say and try and, play gotcha with words and stuff. Like, how do you emotionally and mentally deal with that kind of stuff? Does it ever affect you?
It only affects me if I genuinely effed it up, right? Like there's maybe been 1 or 2 times that I'm like, you know what, this guy is right. And I'll be first to be like, I was wrong. Like my opinion on this was wrong. I saw it going differently. Like it's maybe once, but most of the time, like like you're yelling at me for what? You don't even know me. Like you don't like sometimes the lies are so insane. Like the things that I've seen, like there was one guy that posted that I had no interest being at all that All Out show that we were at.
Yeah.
And that I wasn't even like I was wearing like a suit to All Out.
I remember this.
I didn't even want to be there, and I was just talking the whole time. Like, yeah, I'm enjoying the show, and I'm explaining the show to my wife.
Yeah.
And I was wearing an effing -5-star T-shirt. Like, but you don't even know me. Like you have no idea who I am. You just made an assumption of me. So like that doesn't bother me.
That wrestling fan who watches wrestling in that way makes me it makes me crazy. At one time, gosh, I was with my buddy John LaRocca. I forget which show we were at. Maybe it may have been the New Japan Cow Palace show now that I think about it. But we were talking and like talking in a voice that I'm talking to you right now. So yeah, you got neighbors or whatever, but you're just talking, you're hanging out with your friend, you're at a fun wrestling show and you're just shooting stuff with your friend. And this dude turned to me and was like, you're distracting me. I need to pay attention to what's going on in the ring. Can you keep it down?
You're in an arena.
And
that's
I
very
was
loud.
like my instinct was, what the F? Like I was ready to like just read this guy down, like,
Yeah.
But and then I pulled back and I was like, you know what? He is so interested in what's going on. He's so involved. He's so focused. I could say something, but then I become a little bit of a bully because I don't watch wrestling in that way. Or, maybe he doesn't have friends who he's with and he's bummed out. Or maybe there's something else that is bothering him that caused him to speak up.
You didn't like your face. That's my problem. Most of the time, people don't like my face. They make an assumption because of my hair and my eyebrows. I'm telling you, it's the freaking eyebrows. Do you know how many times I get told by people, they're like, yeah, so-and-so was asking, he's like, is Andrew like a dick? And they're like, no, he's actually like a really good guy. I'm like, I'm not a dick at all. Like a little bit maybe, but I'm nice to everybody, man. I want to talk to everybody. Like I'm very respectful of people. I think people just have their bias and they have their assumption. It's like, dude, how often do I get from both sides that I am biased, that I'm pro WWE, that I'm trying to bury AEW, I don't watch AEW, and then I get the other side that I'm not fair to WWE and I'm only positive for AEW.
Yeah.
Like I have friends on both sides of both companies. Sometimes I enjoy one more than the other, but generally I enjoy AEW more. But that's because of the wrestling. But I'm not trash. I never trash WWE. I don't talk negatively about the company. I talk about what happened, and then I talk about what I like. You're more than welcome to like whatever you like. Like, I don't watch NXT anymore. I can't.
No.
I have no time, and nothing is happening on that show to give me the reason to turn it on. But that doesn't mean that I think it's bad. You could enjoy it. It's just not for me.
Right. All right. I want to end this with a question, and I'm going to ask other people about this. I'll ask them a similar question. Let's say, and I am not breaking news in any way. Let's say in 6 months, Dave Meltzer's like, you know what? I can't do this anymore in the way that I used to do it.
Yeah.
I can't write the Observer the same way that I used to. And he kind of slows down or, even walks away. This is completely hypothetical because none of this is happening and none of this may ever happen. How does the wrestling media landscape change? Because not only is Dave the top journalist when it comes to the reporting aspect of it, but he's also the one who archives all the history in the document that is the Wrestling Observer. How would the game change for everybody in the landscape if he was to ever step down? Like, how do you envision that changing?
I think it would leave a tremendous hole because Dave has been wrestling media was the foundation of wrestling coverage and media. The way it was covered was Dave, really. I mean, obviously there were a bunch like Bill Apter, but Bill Apter did kayfabe interviews.
Yeah.
Apter is one of the most legendary names in wrestling coverage, but he played by the rules whereas Dave did it differently. Dave, for lack of a better term, would get the dirt, but he did provide an avenue for people to discover young talent. So when Dave would talk about a Lance Storm or a Chris Jericho or Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, you stopped and you're like, I got to find out who this guy is. And see his stuff, and Dave has a style of wrestling that he very much enjoys, and to be honest, I grew up watching that, and I grew up reading the Observer, so I tend to sway to that style. But the historical aspect of it is the biggest, right? Anybody could break news event. That's a wheel that's constantly turning. Because at the end of the day, guess what? WWE likes it when stories come out, and AEW likes it when stories come out, even if it's not something they wanted released yet, it's still creating the buzz around it. But the history aspect, that's something that goes away if people aren't telling the story. Jim Cornette's another unbelievable historian. John Arezzi, another guy, right? John Arezzi was one of the first wrestling radio shows I ever heard of.
Yeah.
It was something my cousin in Long Island would listen to. Like, Arezzi played a big part in this. And for me, right? Like, for me, and to be honest, it wasn't the breaking news stuff. It was just like hearing about these older matches. My first memory of Dave listening to the show was Tom Zink. I would have no concept of Tom Zink really, because he was in the early 90s when I wasn't watching WCW. So I think there would definitely be a hole in there. There are people that will fill in the breaking news aspect, but really the name Observer carries tremendous weight in wrestling, and that's why I'm proud to be here on this website. I know that you feel the same way. Dave and Brian have done an unbelievable job. They really paved the road for me to get involved in radio.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Dave Meltzer, Howard Stern, and Dave and Brian, I'll both give them credit, right? Dave and Brian, live audio wrestling from the late 90s on. Howard Stern and Leo Laporte. That is my influence in what I am doing today. Even in my day job. That is my influence. That some aspect of this influenced me. So There would be a hole. Absolutely. The historical aspect, yeah, we're in a, everything is readily available, but, going back and seeing what happened then, where Dave's covering, how many times I've listened to the last day of WCW, that IATA clip? It's archived somewhere. The final days of WCW, I've done house projects multiple times that I've started playing it like from the Greed pay-per-view, which was what, like March 18th on to the sale, and the emotion of people calling in and thinking it's a work and it's not real, and Dave saying like, the business is changing. The other one is the Benoit one that I have very difficulty, but I remember listening to that and like goosebumps right now, because it brings you to a key moment in the history of the industry, and things changed. That was the fork in the road. WCW selling, Chris Benoit, those were all forks in the road.
Somebody could take Dave's writing on the Chris Benoit situation and turn that into a crazy true crime podcast.
Yeah.
Because the detail, and I remember reading those issues and thinking like, I mean, you turn a light on in here. This is getting creepy. Like all the detail that Dave was able to get about that story. So my thoughts about what I just asked you, I think Dave's strength, and he would probably tell you this, is in his analysis as a business reporter. So we have someone like Brandon Thurston who does a really good job as well. Brandon is very interested in that side of things. Sean, you mentioned Sean. When it comes to breaking stories,
Brandon Thurston is one of the greatest. Analysts when it comes to the business side. I give him so much credit because I talk to him and he takes his stuff very seriously.
Yes. Sean for the reporting and the breaking news, like Sean is great. There are other folk. Mike Johnson is fantastic. The content creation piece of that is more Brian Alvarez than it is Dave. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of people are getting pretty damn good at the content creation piece and doing stuff like what we're doing right now. Shout out to the Grapsity guys that they have created a live stream podcast that, you hear people talk about it.
Big numbers. Yeah.
There's a lot of these pieces that are kind of related. And, you talked about Dave and Brian being a giant influence. They're tremendous influence. And it's not just by Dave being the wrestling guy that he is. I know One Wrestling and then, PWI, those guys actually had a version of a podcast before I heard Brian do a version of a podcast. Now, Brian and Dave, like you said, were on IATA. So that kind of changed the game there. But those guys did stuff. But, Brian turned let me turn on my microphone and talk to this invisible audience into a business. And I will always be so impressed with his ability to do that. Him and Tony Leader sort of saw this before most people. But there are other things coming out. Like you see, I see a lot of people really enjoying Nick Hausman's new website. And, Nick was all over the WWE press conference, right? Asking the questions about, about the sale and stuff. And, you give him credit because, and I had this discussion in my Discord, actually, of, the expectation is that from some people, from some people who watch this stuff, the expectation is that everybody who's in a press conference needs to ask these like really hard questions and stuff. And I was like, no, if you are on a beat and if you have you're writing about something or if you're covering something in some way, you should ask hard questions in these kayfabe press conferences. But if you're just a content creator, and you're trying to get interviews and that's how you build your business, you don't have to ask a crazy hard question and risk getting kicked out of a press conference or whatever, So that whole thing is fascinating to me. Pro wrestling is so weird because it's not real and you get the fluff that, but that's part of what they want from you. That's part of why you're there. That's part of why you got the credential. is because you're smart, but you're also smart enough to not ask Tony Khan 7 times in a row, when CM Punk is coming back. So it's a fascinating industry. I love doing this stuff with you. We're Live Pal is, again, it's a passion project for us. The reason why I do it is because I just love doing a show with you, and it's like an hour of like chatting with a great friend and just chopping it up and laughing about wrestling.
Listen, dude, and a lot of that is that also for me. I have we do that show. It takes 1 hour out of my day, and it's a great hour. I look at it as, and the same with Rich. I look at it as I'm at the bar. I'm talking to one of my buddies about pro wrestling, and it's like it's a fun thing for me. And when it's not fun, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
it's not fun.
Absolutely.
And
I think we'll both know.
We'll both know. We'll both know. We'll just be sitting there staring at each other. What do you want to talk about? I don't know. What do you want to talk about? When this is fun, like right now, this is a very fun time for me. I'm in. Like we brought up the Benoit stuff. I didn't watch wrestling for a number of years because it wasn't fun anymore.
Oh my God.
And I didn't want to start it. When I started doing podcasts in 2009, I didn't want to do a wrestling show.
Yeah, you're a tech guy.
I was a tech guy because I was so turned off by pro wrestling when that stuff happened. So I went into tech and I went into everything else that I did. And then wrestling came because Rich is like, hey, you want to do a wrestling show?
Oh, so we have Rich to thank.
Rich is to thank. Yeah, actually, Rich was going to write for my website and he was going to write about gaming. And then somehow that turned into doing a comic book podcast.
Oh, wow.
He started a comic book podcast and I was just producing it. And his co-host and him would end up like talking a little bit about wrestling. Because the Summer of Punk had happened.
Yeah.
And then the conversation, like, we would do like 20 minutes on wrestling. And we're like, let's start Mat Men.
There you go. Origin story right there.
There you go.
All right. Hey, you thank you very much for being my first guest on this brand new show. I was like, there's a couple people in my mind. Andrew probably has to be number one. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who is checking in live and who's listening on the podcast feed. Andrew Zarian, fantastic human. Thank you for joining me.